Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Marrow. Welcome back for the second episode of the Yarn Barn of Kansas Book Club. In our first episode, we talked about the big books that every fiber artist should have. The if you only have one book on the subject, it should be this one titles. In this episode, we look at some of the gems that are worth seeking out in a good craft store. Susan, Melissa, and I spent this episode talking about books that we think are just delightful, and we have a special guest. Liz Gipson joined us to talk about her book, The Weaver's Guide to Yarn. So I'm so excited that we are here in our second episode in the Yarn Barn of Kansas Book Club, where we take a look at some of the special titles in the incredible library that Yarn Barn has on their shelves in Kansas and that you carry around to all of the shows where I see you, where people just love to page through. Today's episode is about, we're calling it Books Off the Beaten Path. There are certain books that we know about because they come out from big publishers and they're kind of on everybody's lips. But then there's these hidden treasures that maybe have been rescued from being out of print in the past, or maybe are an independent author's labor of love that they just have been toiling away at. But they're all kind of gems that you really need somebody in the know to put their hand out and say, you must have this book. Melissa and Susan, let's talk about some of your favorite hidden gems.
So my number one hidden gem is Weaving Designs by Bertha Gray Hayes, Miniature Overshot Patterns. And this is basically the book that I stop people on the street. Have you heard of Bertha Gray Hayes? Because I love overshot, but sometimes I feel that the more traditional overshot patterns are kind of rigid or so bound by tradition that there's not a lot where you can go with them or kind of bring to it your own style or what you want. But these designs are based on a single weaver who wove all of these little samples that she kept, and they are all overshot, but the repeats are quite short. Some of them might be just 16 ends. And so for someone who's new to overshot, that's very doable, much less scope for making a mistake than in some elaborate one from the Davison book that has 500 ends. And the thing I think I love the most is how dynamic some of them are, because they're so often asymmetrical. The kind of the traditional overshot is so symmetrical that when you see some of these that are very dynamic looking, easy to imagine in non-traditional colors, and sometimes for just really exciting overall textures without the traditional snowball, rose elements, but just these fun overall textures, you can't beat this book. So if you have any interest in overshot, Weaving Designs by Bertha Gray Hayes may fan that into a genuine love. I absolutely love it.
And there's something fun about miniatures, even if you make them large. When I flip through that book, I just think, oh, it's so cute.
Yes,
it's not
exactly.
just cute. So thinking about books that take a really deep look at certain structures, what are some of your favorites?
I am a fan of Croak Frog, and there are two books, one that's been around since 2019 and one that came out just last year. And I really like both of these, but I like them for different reasons. So one is Croak Frog, How to Design and Weave by Debbie Greenlaw. And that was the one that came out in 2019. And it, I think, is really accessible to a lot of different weavers. It covers the Croak Frog techniques, but it does it in a friendly, and I don't want to say superficial, but in a way that allows a person without a ton of understanding of maybe the complexities of the structure to just understand, oh, that's just how it works. I don't have to understand why it works. I just understand it's working. I think that is a great thing. She really covers the whole technique, including for rigid heddle weaving. And those rigid heddle weavers, they need to have Croak Frog too.
Yeah.
And she's got projects, and I tell you, there is nothing cuter than her farm sampler. That thing is stinking cute. It's got little farmers, it's got barns, it's got sheep, it's got sunflowers. That is That's worth the price of the book by itself. The newer book is by Angie Parker, and it's called Croakbrog Contemporary Weaving with Color, British spelling. And this book takes a different approach, I think. It's more technical. So for people who are maybe a little uncomfortable with that, maybe this isn't going to be the book that brings them into the structure. But for people who maybe have some more experience with weaving, that might be exactly what they want. And I really like that this book treats this structure and treats woven fabric as a real art form. Many of the photographs in this book show pieces that are hung in galleries and museums, showing that this is a real art form and deserves to be respected. So I like that. So 2 different versions, both beautiful pictures. Croakbrog Contemporary Weaving with Color, maybe a little more technical and maybe a little bit more contemporary. Debbie Greenlaw book, maybe a little bit more approachable. So love them both, just for different reasons.
And then for something completely different.
And I'm going to choke on myself here. M's and O's, a contemporary look at a traditional weave structure on 4 shafts by Susie Ballinger. I will confess that I am not a fan of M's and O's. And yet this book has managed to win me over a little bit. I'm calling it a book. It's a 70-page monograph. So in the great tradition that we talked about of the history of monographs, helping people understand different types of weaving, this book shows M's and O's with maybe a different application than what I've seen previously. So often what I've seen are very, very basic looking. So kind of simplistic fabrics. And to me, the ribbing that creates kind of the lace effect always looks kind of sad and saggy. But not in this book. This book has some really pretty, kind of contemporary, but different uses of M's and O's. So if you've heard of M's and O's and you're like, I don't know what that is, but intrigued by the idea of laciness, have a look at this book because it might surprise you. Oh, and it is brand new. This just came out. We got a copy overnighted to us. So,
and people can order it from Yarn Barn.
Yes.
So speaking of books we love, we have a special guest. Liz Gipson is here to talk about the Weaver's Book of Yarn, which I know is a favorite of Melissa and Susan. Melissa and Susan, could you tell us a little bit about what you like about this book and how it fits into your library?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think the thing I love about this book is that it follows the mental process I go through when I am selecting yarn. When I picture selecting yarn from literally thousands of options here at the Yarn Barn. And this book gives them the tools to eliminate things that aren't going to give them a great experience. Because you think about it, almost anything you can use, but that doesn't mean you should use. It doesn't mean it's going to give you a good experience or that you're going to get the end result that you're looking for. But this book makes that possible to make good choices, even if you don't have a ton of experience. And one of my favorite things is what Liz calls a fiber checklist. And it's kind of in the middle of the book. But it's kind of framed as a series of questions. Does the fabric need to be machine washed and dried? Will it be sat upon or walked on? Will it be around food preparation and consumption? And then that's one axis. And then the other axis is the different fibers. So acrylic, alpaca, angora, cotton, with check marks of, yes, this satisfies that requirement, or no, it doesn't. And it's so useful to just eliminate from consideration immediately, just lots of things that won't work and bring to the foreground the things that will work. I can't describe to you how effective that is. I talk to so many beginning weavers who they don't have a guild or other weavers around, so they are on their own. They don't have anybody to talk to. They probably don't have a yarn store that they can go to. And so they're stuck just looking at images on the internet. And a book like this that just puts tools in their hands. There's another page that I really like that helps clarify the information that you have that maybe you don't know you have. So it's called Decoding Yarn Information. And it's a discussion of when you're looking at a magazine like Handwoven, The project gives you information about the yarn used in that. But if you don't know the lingo, if you don't understand what the numbers mean, you don't have the information that you need to make a good choice. And so this just goes through and explains, this is what that means. Here's information that you didn't know you have, but you actually have. It's so, so useful. And then the last part of the book is kind of what, when I was in school, we would have called textile properties or fiber properties, how different fibers will react to different uses or what characteristics different fibers have, so that you just know you have a little bit more ammunition when you go to make your decisions. So well done. Awesome book. Love it. If I could give this book to every beginning weaver, I would do it because it is so useful.
Ditto. So Liz, can you talk a little bit about creating this book? You set off to to do it on your own as an independent author, teacher, publisher now. So tell me about writing this book.
Oh, I am gobsmacked. And thank you. And the 10 years of teaching in person informed the book, but then 10 years of quaint blog posts, remember those? Writing online, answering weavers' questions who don't have a yarn shop, who didn't have anyone near them to explain, who's left were my teachers. So it was an answer to almost, well, I guess I published it about 10 years ago, a decade's worth of questions. And when you listen to the questions that weavers are actually asking, they are different from what you might suppose you think they need. And so for me, it was a lot of listening and taking a stab at answering questions and sometimes not doing it that great, right? Getting feedback was saying, no, I am still, you can see the confusion, even through the internet, you can see the confusion in their eyes.
So, but you sat down, you said this ought to be a book.
I am an independent publisher, but I have 10 years experience from working at Interweave and knowing the publishing world or working with. I went to my blog to find a post and I suddenly realized I have dozens and dozens of posts on yarn reacting to questions I'm receiving. And it was the number one question I get in the room was, what yarn? Can this substitute for that? How do I think about yarn in terms of, I realized it's a serialized way of writing material. And that's why teachers make great book writers, because they have spent all this time in the learning process with people who are trying to onboard this information.
You've published books with a publishing company, but this is your endeavor by yourself.
Yes, it is. And it's the thing we could do, and really channeling, going back to all those great monographs and Mary Atwater herself, is that our world is so niche-y. And so to be able to create a book that speaks to a niche within a niche, because even though it is a weaver's guide to yarn, I wrote it with a rigid heddle weaver in mind. So there's lots of universal information, but my worldview is so specific. And sometimes you can't be that specific in a more global setting. No book should be created in a vacuum. So the students gave feedback, working with a copy editor, working with a tech editor, sending it out to Jane Patrick read it before it hit the airwaves. She gave me feedback. So that feedback loop is really important, whether you're a publishing house or an individual. Really putting the pages through their paces makes for a better, long-lasting material.
But that's a great point, that some of these books that are off the beaten path, what makes them so special is the opportunity to refine something, to get into the very specific questions that often those details are where all of the fun, exciting learnings come from. So great. Well, Liz, thanks so much for joining us to talk about this book.
I am delighted to be here. And thanks for celebrating publishing and yarn and weavers and all that you do.
On to the next. Susan, do you want to tell me about some of your favorites?
Well, there's 3 different categories besides harness weaving that certainly have things that are mentionable. And in celebration of Plain Weave by Annie McHale, this is just a full stock book of color and for the inkalooms. And the way she puts some of them, they might have 3 colors in them. Some they might have 5 colors in it. And then, of course, she changes her designs, the way the colors are laid out. And she has 3 sections of patterns that are really there in a woven piece. The 39 different patterns. Then she has another section that's 59 patterns and another section that's 79 patterns. And these are just putting colors together. One of the things that I love in this, that there are 2 quotes. One is by Helene Bress. And she says, with just 3 colors and 50 threads, almost a trillion different patterns can be formed for ankle bands.
Wow.
That just gives you a little bit of an insight. They're not trillion in this book, but
Right.
it's close to it. that is a very true quote. And then the other thing that Annie really stresses here is color. She is all about color, and both ones that are successful, ones that aren't. How do you find the color? How do you decide on the color? That all is something that she's very strong on. And again, she has a quote from Mariano Valadez, who is a South American, well, you'd call her a painter of ankle weaving. And when it's translated, it says, why do we use vibrant colors? Because it keeps our essence happy. And why be sad? Because every time we smile, we shine.
Mm-hmm.
But the colors that she uses are intense.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very common colors that probably many weavers will have those, but how you put them together will really make a difference.
And also in that one, it has, again, some interesting asymmetrical combinations that include gradations of color. And I would say I don't see that very often when I see people in magazines or represented in other places. The designs are so often symmetrical. So it's great to see something here that gets out of that groove.
Mm-hmm. It is surprisingly challenging to put together great colors in ankle bands. It's so simple, and that's what makes...
And it's a spiral bound book, which means you can lay it out flat. And while you're messing with the colors, you can read from the book.
Yeah, and Annie published that one all on her own, by herself.
Yes.
Yes. I think you have a favorite tablet weaving hidden gem, too.
Yes. On the tablet weaving, Linda Hendrickson has had various books out for years on various things. And this particular one is called Please Weave a Message. And I'll be darned, the whole book is on fonts.
Wow.
And so she actually shows you how it's already graphed out, how to do various words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different fonts. And many of them also some of them are fonts that aren't necessarily today's fonts, but might be more historical. But the fonts and the statements that she writes through and graphs out for you to do are really, really nice to do. And she even has a chapter on that if you want to, you can set up your Excel sheet and create your own font as well.
Wow.
And on most of these, too, are 24 to 52 tablets that she's using to create these alphabetical structures. And so that's not just an unusual amount of cards. It's not like you need 200 cards to create some of these letters, but 24 to 52 tablets for any of these fonts that she's used.
This is, I think, such a great way to commemorate a special event. One of our coworkers got married about 2 years ago, maybe, and a friend used this kind of tablet weaving to create a banner to kind of commemorate that event. And it was so beautiful and so thoughtful, and just knocked it out of the park as far as really making something that was meaningful to the folks getting married. And it was just wonderful.
That is wonderful. Yeah. Cool. Speaking of spiral bound, there is a book that you guys have there that I wound up buying directly from the author. Can you tell me about the Bridget Heddle book that you have there?
Right. Betty Davenport has written this book called Textures and Patterns for the Rigid Heddle Loom. And she probably made this book in the 70s, maybe. And it's been out for a long time. And it is chock full of things that you can do above and beyond plain weave on a rigid heddle loom. She very easily shows a picture of the woven piece. And then she has a listing, like maybe there might be 8 different pickups that have to be done to create that design. And she writes it out in a numerical sequence so that you know what you have to do. Very simple, very simple. And there are, I have no idea how many there are. I haven't taken the time to count them, but there probably are 100 different designs within here. Maybe not all of that. She also shows about how to do what she refers to as deflected weft. Deflected weft is one thing that she shows, as well as doing the pickup, the standard pickups, supplemental warp and weft floats, warp-faced weaves, double weave, so forth. So she has a variety of different, what you would say, structures that you can choose from. And all of them have multiple designs being used that describe that particular structure.
I kind of feel like Betty waited for the world to catch up with her with that book.
With that one, yes. Yeah.
That is so dead on.
So you mentioned that there are some books that were kind of saved from being out of print. And one of them is the book that you have on finishes.
Yes. And this one, it's, the title, Finishes in the Ethnic Tradition, is pretty much what they're referring to. But these finishes can be worldwide. Many of them would be seen maybe more in South American or even African designs, but they are just wonderful. They're not just for finishing. It could be the way that you do the fringe along the edge rather than doing an overhand knot. You might do a back stitch. There's hem stitching as well, but there's way to do loops, way to take strands, multiplying them together, either braiding or twisting or simply wrapping even to do that. There's also, besides those edges down at the end of your wharf, there's also ways how to do sew fabrics together so that you can make a wider width. And it's a decorative stitch rather than like a flat machine stitch. That so many more. If you want to, at the border, have an accented surface stitch, somewhat like embroidery, not necessarily like it, but of course embroidery would work as well. Also a way to make tassels. So almost a little bit of passementery here in this book. And circular buttons that you can make. So the finishes are different for different topics, but also very viable for contemporary work as well as the ethnic tradition.
And that book is so full of character. It's this rich blue book. It's more of a horizontal than a vertical book. And you flip through it and you just have these one by one. Wow, never occurred to me I could do that or that. And they're finishes, but they're kind of embellishments.
And the drawings are hand drawn.
Oh, wow.
And they are very expert. They are very, very explainable, very lookable so that you learnable, that you can see.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get complacent with just like the overhand knot or the overhand knot with the twisted fringe. And there's nothing wrong with those. But that is just scratching the surface. There are so many options out there. And sometimes if you look at a book like this before you even start the piece, thinking about what the finish could be might change how you think about what the weaving could be. So this is a book that I go back to just again and again and again at all stages of weaving. Thinking about it in advance while I'm weaving or, when I'm done and ready to put the final touches on. It is really invaluable.
And it's one of those books that went out of print, but people loved it so much that an independent group brought it back.
That's right.
That's great. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't think I told you the name of the authors. It's Suzanne Beiserman and Karen Searle.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book. I mean, there's so many wonderful resources in weaving, but other books have terrific titles too. So let's stop over and think about knitting, which is one of my favorites. Which are the books that you love there?
Well, at Barbara Walker books, we're going to talk about them as a unit
Right?
because there are four, and each one of them is a treasury, literally a treasury of knitting patterns. Not knitting patterns as in here's a sweater, but actual how do you make that particular design, that knit design. And again, I love quotations at the front of her fourth book. She says, dedicated to the proposition that all knitters can create. The way these books are written, there are hundreds of patterns. The fourth one has 100 charts. And even 10 years ago, Ravelry was not really a big thing. And so to get patterns, you would use a basic pattern designed for a sweater or something, and then you would input your own choice of what the stitch would be.
Mm-hmm.
The titles are all very similar. We have a treasury of knitting patterns is number one. The second one is a treasury. The second treasury of knitting patterns. One is called Charted Knitting Designs. And the last one is actually a fourth treasury of knitting patterns. These books are huge. Most of them are around 300 pages each. And on each page, there's one or two designs that you get the charts and all the information about how to do it. Now, this is not a sweater book, but it is simply a wonderful dictionary of pattern designs.
It's an imagination book. You can flip through it and think,
Oh,
what
yeah.
would I make with that? And I want to make a scarf. Would this work for that?
Right.
So, yeah.
And if you have a standard base pattern sweater pattern that you like, you can figure out by the stitch gauge and the number of stitches in the repeat, if it would work with that pattern to fit you with whatever gauge you're working with. So it's very useful to have these designs available to look at and review. And also it's just learning how to use and read those designs.
I think it's also a good way to take a pattern where it's maybe seems kind of basic, but you like the shape, but then lets you really make it your own by changing to a textured stitch or a lace stitch or throwing in a cable or something like that to make it a pattern that literally nobody else has. I mean, that's so cool. Who wouldn't want that?
And that actually makes it a great companion to the next book that you like, which is Ann Budd's Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns.
Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns are the patterns for the items,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the stitches. I mean, they refer to plain stockinette. So this is where this type of book would work. Again, Anne has done a series as well. The one we're visiting about is the Hand Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns, period. Then there's the Knitter's Book of Sweater Patterns. And then there is the top-down sweater patterns. So there's 3 different books that are very similar. This one will cover socks, mittens, hats, children's patterns for sweaters, adult patterns for sweaters. And it's written in such a way that at the top of the page, she has all the different sizes available. For instance, for adults, she has 36-inch chest measurement through 54-inch chest measurement. And in the columns going down the page, you're told how many you would cast on for whichever stitch gauge you're working with. And then when you get to a sleeve or underarm shaping, what do you do? How do you do that for every one of those sizings? It's just amazing. And she goes through a vest, pullovers, and cardigans. All 3 of those as basic designs. Most of these in this particular book, the sweater designs are pieces and it's sewn together rather than it being all like top down. The glossary at the end just gives you simple but really thoughtful information on different ways to cast on, cast off, and so forth. So very good glossary at the very end. Again, these have a hard cover, but they're spiral on the inside. So that when you're going through and reading how many stitches you had to decrease and so forth, the book is laying flat for you.
And that book is not only great for pairing with a stitch dictionary, but it's also great for pairing with all kinds of different yarns. Because if you have a yarn, so many of the knitting patterns that we find, or even knitting pattern books, it tells you what yarn to use. But if you have a yarn that you love that you just don't have a pattern for, or you want to do something else with, this book really kind of unlocks that for you. You just need to figure out the gauge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you can take this yarn and this stitch pattern and go forth and make it your own.
Yes.
It's perfect for those purchases, like those spontaneous purchases where it's like, oh, I love this yarn so much. I don't know what I'm going to make with it, but I'm going to get 5 skeins. And then this book, you can just kind of plug in the gauge, the yardage that you have, and it will kind of show you, oh, these are the things you can make. It's great.
And the size of gauge, really from 3 stitches to an inch to 7 stitches to an inch. So it really does cover the range.
No, going back to stitch dictionaries, this next one, you might not necessarily pair it with the Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns because a lot of those are meant to be 3-dimensional. But this next book is very much a stitch dictionary.
Yeah, this is the Reversible Knitting by Cecilia Campochiaro. Yeah, this is a really interesting new book. And I think I see so many people who kind of rely on their old favorites. Oh, here's my baby blanket. This is the one I do. And there's nothing wrong with that. And especially if you have a family tradition of doing the same blanket for every kid, that's great. But if that's not you, if you are wanting to do a scarf and you want to see it on both sides because that's how you move through the world and your scarf is flailing in the wind and all of that, and you don't want an ugly side, this book solves that problem for you because it's all stitch patterns, or stitch. It's a stitch dictionary, but each one looks as good from the back, or the so-called wrong side, as it does from the front. So it's perfect for scarves, for afghans, baby blankets, even things that you might dismiss as being, oh, that's just functional. It doesn't have to look great. But what about like a hot pad or a washcloth or something like that, where what a fun way that would be to like make a fun reversible stitch washcloth for each of your friends. There's so much potential in this book. And it is just, it's lace, it's cables, it's color work, it's just amazing combinations of stitches that don't have a bad side. Who wouldn't want that?
One of the things I love about that book is the 3-dimensional element to it. Toward the back, there are these stitches that they're like egg crates.
Yes.
They pucker and distort, and it's so cool.
Yes, I was picturing a little baby rolling around on the floor on a fluffy blanket made with this really interesting, like you say, egg carton type textile. I mean, just what a fun thing that would be.
Before we leave the world of knitting, your last book in this category is something that's kind of different. Instead of being a choose your own adventure book, this is a kind of a different adventure book.
Yes, this is The Wonder of Wool, A Knitter's Guide to Pure Breed Sheep by Justine Lee and Jess Morency. And this is a new book that really does a deep dive into looking at what can you knit with that is breed specific, and not just breed specific, but British breed specific. But more than that, it really looks at what do each of these breeds bring to your project. So that could mean a rare breed that is especially springy or resists felting, or maybe it has a very short staple. So you can't do this kind of spinning, but you can do woolen spinning, or sorry, I couldn't think of the word worsted at the time. But part of that is really saying that there is something valuable in the heritage of these breeds. And I am an absolute sucker for books that present variables by using the same format for each page. So in this book, each breed is presented with characteristics of what the breed is like. So that may mean describing a little bit about what the animal looks like, or a little bit of its history, but then what does that fiber actually look like? Is it crimpy? Is it smooth? What is the staple length? And then it has a section called Tips for Spinners and Knitters. And that's where it gets super interesting. So right now I'm looking at Black Welsh Mountain. And it says, because it's a native breed, the Black Welsh Mountain has a soft handle. The fleece has 2 layers, a finer undercoat and a coarser outer coat, so it needs sorting. The fleece has virtually no kemp. It's lightweight and can be mixed with a white fleece of similar length to achieve various shades of gray wool. It's naturally resistant to fading, making it ideal for timeless projects. It's a medium staple fleece, so it can be worsted or woolen spun. So it does that for each breed. And I think that is just a fascinating look at kind of the history of raising sheep in our human past, and then what is still available now. Mm-hmm. And that's the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is just these very charming, very classic looking, interesting, full sweater designs. So full instructions, cast on to binding off the last stitch. And they're all focusing on these breed-specific yarns. So it's kind of a twofer. For people who want patterns, it's got some of that. For people who are just interested in kind of the aspects of spinning these fibers, it's got that as well. So a very fun book.
One of my favorite things about that book is how beautiful it is. There are beautiful photos of the fiber, but also these incredible black and white photos of these sheep that just look like, portraits that you could frame.
Yes. Yeah, they are stunning photographs.
They look hand-drawn.
They do look drawn, yeah.
And they're not.
Nope.
That's just the perfect lighting for the photographs.
I don't know how they made those sheep stand still like that. I mean, honestly.
I think Babe was there working his magic.
So speaking of breeds and spinning and knitting, let's take a look at your spinning choices.
So there were 2 books that I thought were interesting, and they're very different. The first one is A Spinner's Dozen, 14 Darn Useful Tools by Stephanie Gostad. This book, I totally get that it's not for everybody, but I just had a ball reading this. And for people who are fascinated by going through estate sales and antique stores and interested in the history of textiles as it's expressed in the tools, this book is so fun to read and would be fun to kind of learn what to look for the next time you go to some little hole-in-the-wall antique store that might have tools that you're not familiar with. But it also gives you really justification for using these tools because they are going to make a difference in your spinning experience. And she gave this interesting little description of why. Okay, so she says, why the need for these tools? The answer is simple and powerful. The right tool will give you the time to be more productive, spin more yarn, knit more rows, pass more wefts. Most importantly, they give you the time to spend on the processes you love. Organized by steps in spinning process, fiber prep, spinning, plying, skeining. Especially interesting for people who love going to estate sales or antique stores since some of the items here aren't being made widely. So it does go through, why should you invest in this item if you find it? And she gives you a justification because it will actually make your time spent more worthwhile. And I think you can't really argue with that. We only have so many hours in our lives to spend on these wonderful activities. So if getting the right tool can make it more efficient and more fun, got to go for it.
And I would imagine that, and those are hand-drawn illustrations as well, right?
They are. They're adorable illustrations. Absolutely adorable. Who is the illustrator?
By Stephanie herself.
Yes, you are correct.
Yes.
Yes, that is very fun.
Stephanie and her partner, Alden Amos, were such fans of historic textile tools. And she has had, unfortunately, we lost her last year, but she had such a sense of humor and was completely unafraid to be really enthusiastic. So, yeah, I love that.
Yes, that is very clear in the text. Absolutely. Then the second one, I think this one it's going to rub people the right way or the wrong way. So, and it's called Listen to the Wool. It's by Josephine Walton, who is a Swedish author. And it is a book that when I thought about it a lot, trying to decide how I felt about it. And what I decided was my 1-sentence description would be, this is a book that might make you a better spinner, even if it doesn't improve your yarn. Because I think it has so much to say about how you approach any kind of making, whether it's spinning or weaving or cooking or gardening or any activity that you feel passionate about. It has a lot to say about how you can get even more out of it by doing it mindfully. Now that I've said that, there are many people, and I cannot argue with this, where they're like, well, I get that you can learn from your mistakes, but if you will just tell me how to do it correctly the first time, I can just skip to doing it that way.
Yeah.
And those people are probably not going to enjoy this book. But for people who maybe have a little bit of leeway, that they might be interested in kind of just embracing a slower way of making and thinking more about the journey than the destination, I think they might get a lot out of this book.
One of the things I love about that book is Josephine's connection with nature, doing things outside, and her just kind of unhurried exploration element of it, and the way that just by following something as far as she wants to go, she arrives in these extraordinary places. I'm a big fan, so I'm a little bit biased. I just want to go hang out in those Swedish fields.
I know, exactly. Yeah. I found this quote that I liked. There are two quotes, actually. The first one, there's no shortcut to spinning and preparing wool. You need to practice to understand the technique. And I appreciate that completely. I think that trying to cut corners when I have done it, because I'm a terrible corner cutter. I do it all the time. And I am almost always sorry because, yeah, doing it the right way and understanding why is super important. But then reflecting on, I'm looking back at a piece that had been super challenging for her to make. And she says, I see the mistakes. I remember what went wrong, how I struggled, and how I solved the outcomes of my shortcomings. With a sudden tingle in my heart, I realized that the mistakes are there to teach me something. I expand to embrace my mistakes as a map of what I have learned. And what a kindness to herself to grant herself the grace that, yeah, she's not perfect and she made that mistake, but learned from it. And this is where she is now. So I think that's pretty incredible.
One of my very favorite Josephine stories, she's been a guest on the podcast. All through the winter in Sweden, she goes for a dip every morning in a frozen lake. There's
Oh my gosh.
There's a hole in the ice, and she and some of her friends go take a dip in wearing a bikini and a wool hat. And then she gets out of it and she has these wool knitted pants that she puts on afterwards that keep her warm. So, because of course the water is warmer than the air, but
yeah. Oh, golly.
She is definitely in it for the experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Well, thank you guys for this tour through some of your hidden gems, some of the surprise delights. And where can I find all these? I assume I can find them all on the yarnbarn.ks.com website.
Yes, you can. Absolutely. And then we'll also be going to Convergence in New Orleans in August, and we will take many, many hundreds of pounds of books to there. So if you're going to be in the New Orleans area, come see us. I think you will be delighted.
If you can't make it to Convergence, people can certainly find you in Lawrence, Kansas, and sometimes at events around the country. I always love finding your booth there.
And the books are all up on the website as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I can't wait to dig further into these. I found out exciting things about books I thought I knew already, and there are some books that I had not heard of that I'm excited to learn about. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you next time. Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.